I'm Giles Duley and I'm a photographer. And right now I am locked down in wonderful sunny Hastings.
What is unique about Humanity and Inclusion's work?
I've been on so many field trips with HI. I don't think I could list all the places where I have visited projects, but some of them include Lebanon, to Gaza, Jordan, Cambodia, Rwanda, Uganda. I mean, there's like a list of places that I could reel off. And so, I guess I'm pretty well qualified to talk about the things that I see when I'm there. And the thing that has always struck me is the dedication and passion that the teams who are doing specifically, because it's what I see a lot of, physiotherapy, and going and actually visiting people who are living in very difficult situations. And it's more than just the turning up and giving a physiotherapy session. It's the bond that you see between the beneficiaries, the people that are being helped, and the teams themselves. It never looks like it's a job to them. And you hear the jokes. They've obviously got long-standing jokes, and they know them really well. And sometimes they'll maybe bring some rice or some other bits and pieces that they know that family needs, and they sit and they talk to them, and then they do the sessions. And for me, the international sectors for charities and for NGOs, I think they have a lot of challenges. I think a lot of them are too big, and a lot of them don't have the opportunity to have that real personal connection with the people that they are supporting and working with. And so what I would say, without really any question, from my years of being in the field with HI, is that it always feels like it's personal. It always feels that it's not a big nameless organization. Rather, it's people who are really impacting people's life, and they do that with love and dedication.
Which story stands out to you on your trips with HI?
It's really hard for me to choose a story that is my favorite or one that means most to me from the years of documenting people with HI. The most important to me, in that it changed my life, is the story of Kholoud, who I met in 2014 when I was with HI in Lebanon. I'd gone there a few years after my own injury. I'd been injured in Afghanistan. I'd lost both my legs and my arm, and I'd spent a year in hospital. And at the end of that, I was told I'd probably never work again, never walk maybe, and certainly could never return to the work I'd been doing before, documenting these humanitarian stories. So the trip to Lebanon really was my first proper trip back to work. It was 3 years after I got injured, and I was very nervous about it. It was the first time I returned properly, i.e. carrying all my own gear and traveling around the country. And one of the first people I met was a woman called Kholoud. My project was to look at some of the most vulnerable refugees who were living in Lebanon. So it was single-parent families, the elderly, and people living with the injuries caused by the war, people really like myself. When I met Kholoud, she was in a makeshift tent in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. It was a really desperate situation. The tent was made of bits of plastic and even billboard posters that had been pulled down. And Kholoud was a tetraplegic. She'd been paralyzed from the neck down by a sniper's bullet. So she was lying in this tent. She couldn't move at all. The tent had no windows. It was tiny. She had 3 kids in there. It was really a desperate situation. She was getting some physiotherapy from HI, but a lot of the care was coming from her husband, Jamal. And it really shocked me meeting her. She told me the story of how she'd been working in her garden in Syria when a sniper had shot her. And she'd actually fallen on top of one of her own children. She'd got some emergency medical treatment. They managed to get her to Lebanon out of Syria. But as I say, her situation was just so bad. And I remember asking her, what's your hope for the future? And she said to me, I just want to be a mother again. So I made some photographs. I spent the day with her family. And yeah, it was very important for me. I was back working and I was really moved by the story. And I came back to the UK and I had many other stories that we had collected together with HI, and that story was published. And that was really significant for me because it was the first time my work was published following my accident. So it was 3 years after my accident. It was the first time my work was published without any reference to what had happened to me. Because up until that point, every photograph that was published would always have to go on about Giles Duley, who was injured by a landmine, Giles Duley, who's a disabled photographer. It always had to label me. And this was the first time that the work stood on its own. It just said, Giles Duley, photographer. And it enabled me to tell these stories of Kholoud, Aya, Reem, many other people I'd met. And that was hugely significant in my own recovery because it was the moment I had my life back. You know, one of the things I know from meeting so many people living with disability is they get tired of their injuries, of their illnesses being bigger than them. That when people meet them, the first thing they talk about is those injuries, is the disability they live with. And they don't get seen as people anymore. And for me, having my work published purely on the merits of the work itself really felt as if I'd escaped from the injuries that I'd been living with for the last 3 years. So it was a hugely important moment for me. And Kholoud's story was an incredibly important story. There's a sort of twist to it, though. I went back 2 years later and I was in Lebanon again working on another project. And I managed to track down a lot of these families that I've been meeting. There's an amazing girl called Aya, a woman called Reem who lived on a rooftop. And it was very good to go back and see people and catch up on their stories. On the last day I was there, I got a phone call from Kholoud. Well, it's actually from my husband, Jamal, saying, "We hear you're in Lebanon, we'd love to see you." And I remember that moment as if I was punched in the stomach. It makes me sick to even think of that moment now, because I asked the question, "Where are you now?" And Jamal said, "We're in the same place you last saw us." And I hadn't even bothered to go and look at that place. I just assumed that of all the people I've probably met in my life, nobody was in more desperate need of support in terms of housing and a new life than Kholoud. And yet, 2 years later, to hear that she was in the same place. And what really got me is that I thought as a photographer, my story should change her life. Maybe that's arrogant to think, but that's why I do what I do. And I thought, these photographs had appeared around the world. Surely somebody would have seen this and thought, she needs help. She needs more help. So I went to see her that day. And to be honest, I burst into tears when I walked into that tent. And I saw Kholoud on the bed where she'd not moved for 2 years. And I said, "I failed you." And she looked at me, and Kholoud is like an angel. She just smiled and she said, "It's okay, we knew you'd come back." And it's hard to explain that house and that home. I'd been there the first time and I'd done the photographs and I spent some time and I'd met also the HI staff, the physiotherapists that were helping her. It had been a great day. On this visit, I really got to know Kholoud and her family. And what I found in this place, in this tent, where water would come in, where the sun meant it was so hot you could hardly breathe in there, where you couldn't see, where Kholoud had stayed at the same bit of the ceiling the whole time, just staring at that ceiling. In this desperate place, what I found is the most loving family, the most perfect family I have ever found. The kids do homework on the bed with her. They laugh, they joke. Jamal goes into this little kitchen, which is not a kitchen, it's just like a little area with a stove at the corner. And he cooks and he whispers to me, my biggest fear is that she does not love me as much as I love her. And when he brings the food over, Kholoud will always say, "Oh, I need some more salt," or "It needs a bit more oil." And then she'll wink at me and say, "I have to keep him on his toes." And the laughter, the warmth, the compassion in that place is inspiring. And I spent my whole week there. And on the last day, I had a photograph because I often travel with images of the people I've done, because I think it's important to give it back. And it was a photograph I'd taken when I'd first visited with HI of Kholoud and Jamal on the bed. And obviously Kholoud is lying down and Jamal's at the end of the bed holding a hand, looking at her. And normally I give these photographs back to people, but I thought I can't give them this photograph because it will remind them that they're in the same situation as they were 2 years before. But I did. And I got that photograph out the bag and I handed it over to Kholoud. But before I gave her the photograph, and I say what was really disturbing was that the photograph was identical to the scene in front of me because nothing had changed. In the photograph, it was Kholoud lying down with Jamal at the end of the bed. In reality, it was exactly the same. But I gave them the photograph and I said, when I took this photograph, I did not take a photograph of a refugee. I did not take a photograph of a woman living with a disability. When I took this photograph, I took a photograph of love. A couple who are so in love with each other. And this photograph represents that. And that's the moment that I realized that I'm not a war photographer. You will never find one of my photographs of somebody firing a gun, a tank, a plane, an explosion. What you will find in my photographs and in all the projects I've done with HI, you will see humanity. You will see a grandfather playing with his grandchild, a mother feeding her baby, a father on the floor doing sums with his kids. Because I go to some of the worst places and I see people who have suffered immense hardships and dealing with incredibly difficult situations caused by the disabilities that they're living with. What do I find? I find love. And it's that I photograph. And so that story, Kholoud's story, is so important to me because she made me realize what my focus is as a photographer. And luckily we were then able to find a way to get her out of that home, to get her into different accommodation, to give her a second chance at life. And now she actually lives in Holland with her family where she's safe. And she once said to me, why have you done so much to help me? And I said, Kholoud, what you don't understand is you were the one that after I got injured, nobody wanted to work with me as a photographer. All the magazines I'd used to work for, or the agencies I used to work for weren't giving me work. Nobody believed I could still work as a photographer with two legs missing and one arm. So, but you were the first person that trusted me with your story. And that story was then published. So you were the one that gave me my life back, and I owed it to give you yours back too.